I slammed the door shut behind me, the kind of slam that rattles your whole body. It wasn't the door itself, but the weight of everything crashing down on me. I had just stepped off a plane after my third deployment in Iraq. The same dust, the same heat, the same unbearable silence, only this time, it wasn't just the country I was leaving behind. It was the feeling of being home, or rather, the absence of that feeling. This time, something felt different. My gut told me not to tell anyone I was coming back, so I didn't. No texts, no calls, no guess who's back post with an American flag filter. I didn't need the world to know. I didn't even need them to know I was here. I just needed space. 22 hours on a flight with nothing but my gear, my rifle, and 1,000 thoughts about the faces I left behind, some buried in the sand, some too far gone to recognize. By the time I hit the sidewalk outside my grandparents' house in Masonville, Virginia, the sun was hanging low, almost like it was angry. The trees, the same oak trees I had grown up with, stood tall, watching me as I approached the front porch. Bad sign number 1, the porch light wasn't on. Bad sign number 2, no one was answering the door. Not a single knock or hello. I still had my key, the brass one Grandpa had given me when I was 13. If you ever need to get inside, this will still work. That was his line. It always worked. I unlocked the door. The second it creaked open, a chill ran through me. Not because of the cold, but because of the quiet that swallowed me whole. It wasn't the kind of silence you feel after a long day of work. This silence was different. It pressed against my chest, like a concrete slab. I called out for Grandma. No answer. I checked the living room first. Everything was neat, almost too neat. Blanket folded just right. The TV remote placed with surgical precision on the coffee table. Then I moved through the house like I'd done 100 times before, past the kitchen, her garden boots by the back door, and into the master bedroom. That's where I found her. Grandma lay there, in the same hospital bed we set up 2 years ago after her stroke. The blue sheets, the floral pillowcase, everything was the same, except she wasn't the same. The machines hummed softly in the background, oxygen hissing like a distant whisper. The monitor blinked a dull green every few seconds. But the worst part, her hands, limp, one eye barely open, as if she was fighting sleep or trying to wake up, but couldn't muster the energy. I stood there for 5 minutes. 5 minutes just staring at her, not knowing what to do. My stomach turned. The weight of the situation starting to hit me. It wasn't the fact that she was there, it was the fact that no one else was. I checked her wiped the corner of her mouth with a tissue, adjusted her blanket. The silence in the room was unbearable. It's me, Grandma. Ava's home, I whispered. She didn't stir. I looked around. No get well cards, no fresh flowers, not a single water glass, just the machines. That's when I pulled out my phone. Maybe I missed something. Maybe there was an explanation, some text, some call that could explain where everyone was. But there was nothing. Nothing from my mom. No voicemails from my dad. Just one fresh Facebook post, time-stamped only an hour ago. Sunsets in Cabo never get old. No regrets. Retired life. Finally free. I could see my parents, both of them, holding cocktails, smiling like nothing had changed. Like Grandma's life was just a background story in their perfect world of beach resorts and cocktails. I couldn't even swallow it. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't forgetfulness. This wasn't just a lack of time. This wasn't about vacations or rest. This was abandonment. I walked past the old family portrait hanging in the hallway. Grandpa in his Navy uniform, standing proud and straight. He was staring right through the camera. And in that moment, it felt like he was staring through time and into me. He always used to say, if anything ever happens to me or her, and they don't show up, open the safe. I knew exactly what he meant. He wasn't talking about money, not gold coins or secret documents. He was talking about them. My parents, his own son and daughter-in-law, the people who couldn't even bother to show up when it mattered the most. The safe, the one I used to sneak peeks at when I was younger, wondering what treasure it might hold. I walked into the study. Kneeling in front of the old wooden desk, I typed in the code. It clicked open almost like it had been waiting for this exact moment. Inside, there was a thick envelope. Grandpa's handwriting on the front, that same strong, no-nonsense handwriting. Ava, if you're reading this, it means I trusted you to be here. I exhaled, holding my breath, and opened the envelope. What I found inside was everything I needed to know. the truth. I stared at the envelope for what felt like an eternity. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from something deeper. Recognition. The handwriting. Grandpa's steady, calculated script. It was like he was still here, watching, waiting for me to understand what was coming. Ava, if you're reading this, it means I trusted you to be here. Those words echoed in my head as I pulled the sheets of paper out one by one. The first 3 were typed, neat and professional, but that last one, the handwritten one, felt different. It was meant for me, personal. My breath caught as I read through the typed pages. Grandpa's will, and it was clear. My parents had already failed. If my son and daughter-in-law are not physically present within 12 hours of either my or my wife's incapacitation or passing, they forfeit all inheritance rights, financial or otherwise. 12 hours. They hadn't even arrived. Grandma had been on life support for 3 days. 3 whole days. They were too busy living their retired life in Cabo to care. The will went on, almost cold in its precision, but Grandpa had always been like that, no nonsense. His final wishes were direct. In such event, all property, liquid or fixed, is to be transferred to my granddaughter, Captain Ava Hall, United States Army, the only person in this family to uphold the values of honor, duty, and presence. That word presence hit me like a punch to the gut. It wasn't about blood. It wasn't about family legacy. He didn't care about love or loyalty. He cared about showing up, about being there when it mattered. My parents had failed the test. And now, I was the one left holding the weight of it all. I felt a strange calm wash over me. It wasn't joy. It wasn't anger. It was a sense of clarity. I had been waiting for this moment, for them to show who they really were, and for Grandpa's final message to guide me forward. I stood up slowly, holding the papers in my hand, the gravity of everything settling on my shoulders. I didn't need to make a dramatic scene. I didn't need to scream or cry. I knew what I had to do. I walked over to the desk, opened the top drawer, and there it was, the number. The number Grandpa had hidden away for years, just in case. Gregory Thorne. I dialed the number, my fingers moving with a steady rhythm I had come to trust in the field. It rang twice before he picked up, his voice low, almost expectant. Captain Hall, he said, his tone calm as if we had spoken just yesterday. Your grandfather told me if you were the one calling, it meant the rest of them weren't worth a dime. It's time, I replied. Good, he said, his voice steady. I'll file the trigger clause immediately. You don't need to do anything else. You being there is proof enough. I hung up, my mind racing as I moved back to the living room. The house felt colder now, even though the sun was still setting. My parents still hadn't called, hadn't texted. It was like they had disappeared into thin air. The selfishness was suffocating. I turned off my phone and set it on the table, ignoring the flood of missed calls. They weren't important anymore. What mattered now was making sure Grandpa's legacy, his values, didn't get lost in the noise of their absence. I went back to the study, sitting in Grandpa's chair. It still smelled like him, like old leather and books. I let the silence fill the room. There was a strange peace in it. It wasn't the silence of neglect, like the one I had felt earlier, but the silence of something earned. A pause before the storm. And the storm was coming. I could feel it in my bones. It was only a matter of time before the storm arrived. And when it did, it came in the form of a phone call, one more missed call from my mother. But this time, I didn't pick up. I didn't need to hear her voice. The next few hours were a blur of time and tension. I sat in the same chair, the weight of the envelope in front of me. Every minute that passed felt like the ticking of a clock, a countdown to the inevitable confrontation. I had just signed the documents, sending them off to Gregory Thorne. When the phone finally rang again, I knew who it was before I even saw the name flash on the screen. Mom. I didn't answer. At this point, they had been calling non-stop for almost 2 hours, one after another, like they had some kind of entitlement to my time, to my space, to my life. But that wasn't their right. Not anymore. I knew what was coming next. It would be an explosion of anger, of blame. It always was. But this time, there was a sense of finality in it. The last card had been played. I turned off my phone. I was done with their noise. An hour later, the doorbell rang. I didn't have to look through the peephole to know who it was. The sound of high heels clacking on the porch steps confirmed my suspicion. Mom? She didn't wait for an invitation, of course. She never did. Instead, she stormed in, her face tight with fury. My father followed closely behind, wearing his usual air of authority, the one that said he was always in control, always had the upper hand. But not today. I stood up slowly, giving them both a moment to take in the room. The empty space, the papers scattered across the desk, the silence. You've crossed the line this time, Ava, my mother hissed, her voice sharp as a knife. You have no right to do this. I met her eyes without flinching. You didn't show up. Her face flushed. We were busy. We were handling important matters. This is our retirement. Your retirement? I repeated, almost laughing. You mean your vacation? You left Grandma to die alone, and now you're standing here, pretending you didn't do anything wrong? She opened her mouth to speak, but I didn't let her. You can't even pretend to care about family. You never did. My father, always the quieter one, stepped forward. His eyes were filled with anger, but I could see the cracks starting to form. You're making a mistake, Ava. You'll regret this. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Everything had already been said. Instead, I reached into the drawer, pulled out the small USB drive Grandpa had given me before he passed, the one he had kept in his study, tucked away with the legal documents. I tossed it onto the desk between us. What's this? My father asked, eyeing the drive suspiciously. He tried to act nonchalant, but I saw the uncertainty creeping in. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I plugged the USB drive into the computer. The screen flickered to life, and there he was, Grandpa's face, staring straight into the camera. If you're watching this, it means I'm probably dead or close. Let's skip the niceties. I watched as my father's face twisted in discomfort. Grandpa's voice, calm and unshakable, echoed through the room. I wrote this will myself. No one held my hand. Not Ava. Not anyone. Grandpa's eyes were as fierce as I remembered them. The man never backed down from a fight. If my son or daughter-in-law weren't there when it counted, they don't deserve anything. The room fell silent. The weight of Grandpa's words hung in the air like a fog. My father's face hardened as the video continued, Grandpa's voice remaining steady. Ava is the only one left who understands what it means to show up. The screen went black. For a moment, no one moved. The silence stretched on, and then it was over. The tension in the room was suffocating. My parents stood there, stunned by the video that had just shattered the facade they'd built for years. The silence stretched on until my mother spoke, her voice trembling. This is outrageous. She spat, eyes wild with frustration. He was senile when he wrote that. He didn't know what he was doing. I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. No, I said quietly. He was angry. And he was right. My father's hand gripped the back of the chair, knuckles white with tension. We'll fight this in court, Ava. We'll make sure this will gets thrown out. Good luck with that. I muttered under my breath. I could see the calculations running in his mind, the gears turning as he tried to find a way to regain control. But he was running out of time. And this time, he was powerless. We'll get a lawyer. We'll take this to trial, and we'll make sure we win. We always win. I couldn't help but smirk at that. Win? They hadn't even shown up when it mattered most. What kind of victory was that? I wasn't about to let them rewrite history, not after everything I'd just seen. Dad, I said, my voice low and calm, you've got no case. You don't even have standing. My mother's face flushed with rage, her eyes burning with fury as she took a step toward me. You think you've won? You think this is over? I didn't respond. There was no need. The documents had already been filed. The will had been executed, and nothing they did could change that. You should have been here, I continued. You should have shown up, but you didn't. You chose the beach over family. You chose comfort over duty. And now you get nothing, not a dime. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I was simply calm, and that made the moment feel even more powerful. It wasn't about yelling or arguing. It was about standing my ground, about holding the line. My father stared at me, his face turning red as he clenched his fists. I knew him well enough to see that he was losing his temper, but it didn't matter anymore. The battle had already been won. It wasn't about him. It wasn't about my mother. It was about honoring the people who showed up, the people who put family before convenience, and that was the last thing they'd ever understand. The next morning, I brewed a pot of coffee in the same kitchen where I had spent countless hours. As a child, the smell of old wood and coffee beans almost made me believe that everything was still normal. It was the same kitchen where Grandma had once hummed hymns and cracked eggs into a skillet, but she wasn't there anymore. Instead, the Machines still hummed in the next room. The oxygen hissed like a dragon still asleep, waiting for its time to wake. Grandma was gone, but the silence wasn't oppressive anymore. It was earned. It felt like peace. By 10 o'clock a.m., my phone had started vibrating again. The constant pings, the texts, the missed calls, they never stopped. My father's lawyer, my parents, even my little brother, who hadn't even visited Grandma in 6 months, were all suddenly concerned. The hypocrisy was so thick I could practically taste it. They thought they could come back and fix things, erase the fact that they'd been absent when it mattered most. They couldn't. The door had been closed. They had missed their chance. Now, the only thing left was the aftermath. I didn't answer. Instead, I grabbed my keys and headed out to meet Gregory Thorne at the hospital. He was waiting for me in the admin office, and when I walked in, he stood up and offered me a firm handshake. "James was a damn good man," he said, his voice steady, almost affectionate. "He trusted you more than he trusted oxygen." I nodded, acknowledging the sentiment. He was. We walked through the paperwork together. The trigger clause had been airtight, and everything was in order. The signatures, the timestamps, the legal documentation. My grandfather had planned this carefully, leaving nothing to chance. He knew exactly what would happen when he was gone, and now, his final wishes were being carried out. The final blow came just before noon when I got the confirmation from the hospital admin that my parents weren't going to show up within the 12-hour window. The reason they gave? Travel conflict and emotional distress. I almost laughed. They had 3 days to make it back. 3 days. But they chose the beach over family. And now, it was too late. The phone buzzed again. This time, I didn't even look at it. It was from my mother. She had probably been screaming into the phone by now, demanding answers that wouldn't come. They thought they could change everything, make it go back to how it was, but it was too late. The silence had already done its job. I picked up my coffee cup, letting the warmth seep through my fingers. The steam swirled up, filling the space with the familiar scent of home. It almost made me believe, just for a second, that everything was normal. But Grandma was still gone, and the phone still buzzed. At 11:32 a.m., I finally made the decision. I walked into Grandma's room. I could still hear the faint hum of the machines, the oxygen still hissing softly, almost like it was holding on, reluctant to let go. The 4 was still there. The blanket was still tucked in around her frail body. But now, it was time. It was time to end the waiting. I stood beside her bed for a moment, feeling a strange peace. She wasn't going to wake up. She wasn't going to stir. She had already waited too long. I wasn't going to let her linger in this state any longer. The nurse entered, her presence gentle and respectful. I nodded at her, and she began removing the 4-line. The hiss of the oxygen grew quieter as the machines powered down. It was a peaceful transition, not sudden, not harsh, just a quiet release. "I'm here, Grandma." It was the same words I had whispered before, the words I thought I'd never have to say to her. But now, I was letting her go, setting her free. The room seemed to breathe with us, the light outside dimming as if in quiet respect for the moment. And just like that, it was done. No grand dramatic gestures, no tears, no outbursts. Just the soft hum of machines powering down and the peaceful silence of a life that had come to its end. At 12:14 p.m., Grandma Hall passed away. Just a moment after, the phone buzzed again. This time I picked up. "What did you do?" My mother's voice was shrill, almost panicked. It was the voice of someone who had just realized they lost control. She had always thought she could control everything, manipulate the situation. But not this time. "She's gone," I said flatly. "What? What did you do, Ava? You can't just make that decision. You have no right to do this." I closed my eyes, pressing the phone tighter against my ear. I didn't need to explain. We were on vacation, Ava. We were handling things. Your father needed rest. Rest. The words stung more than I expected. The irony was unbearable. You didn't show up. That's what this is about. You chose your comfort over family. You chose the beach over Grandma. You think it's about me? It's not. It's about her. It's about the fact that I showed up when no one else did. She stammered into the phone, not knowing what to say, but I didn't wait for her to find an answer. I ended the call. For a moment, the house was still again, but then the pings began. Missed calls from my parents, their lawyer, and a few cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. They thought they could pick up the pieces of a life they had ignored for so long. but they couldn't. They hadn't earned the right to fix this. I could feel their panic, their desperation. They realized they were losing control. They always thought they would have it, thought they could manipulate their way through anything. But this time, they were powerless. I sat in the living room, letting the chaos unfold around me, my phone silent beside me. The only noise now was the sound of my heartbeat, slow and steady, as I sat in the quiet that had taken over. By 3:00 p.m., I got another call. This one wasn't from my mother. This was from their lawyer. The familiar voice on the other end sounded almost resigned. "Ava," he said, "we filed a motion to contest the will. We believe emotional duress and undue influence were at play." I didn't even flinch. I didn't even blink. "Send me the paperwork." He hesitated for a moment. "I think you know this is going to get ugly. Let them make noise," I said calmly. "I'll bring the silence." The call ended, and I leaned back, letting the weight of everything finally sink in. The battle was won. It had never been about money, never about the house or the land. It had been about showing up, about being present when it counted. The doorbell rang again that evening. I was already expecting them. They had finally arrived. My parents, with their shiny new car and designer luggage, striding toward the house with the same confidence they always carried, as if they still owned everything. But it was different now. They didn't own this house anymore. They didn't own anything here. The power had shifted. I watched from the window as they stepped out of the car, the sound of their heels on the gravel growing louder. My father was the first to step out, jaw tight, shoulders rigid. He still tried to carry himself like he was in control. He wasn't anymore. They didn't knock. Of course, they didn't. My parents didn't bother with any formality anymore. They walked straight into the house like they had always owned it, like they had the right to stroll back into my life after abandoning it for so long. I stayed seated in Grandpa's study, the papers still spread out in front of me. The mug of coffee beside me sat untouched. Everything felt familiar. The old brass lamp on the desk, the small photo of Grandma and Grandpa in their prime, everything was exactly where it had always been, except it wasn't the same anymore. They entered the room like they were still in charge, still holding on to the last semblance of control. But it was over. "You don't have the right to do this, Ava," my mother spat, her face a mixture of anger and disbelief. She had the audacity to act like she still had the upper hand. "You've crossed a line that you'll regret." I didn't flinch. I didn't even acknowledge the threat. "You should have been here," I said calmly, staring her down. "You should have shown up, but you didn't," she scoffed, turning to look at my father for support. But even he couldn't muster up the confidence he had once had. His voice was rough when he spoke. "This isn't over, Ava. We'll make sure of it." His eyes burned with frustration, but there was something else there too. Doubt that they could still control everything. "You think you can still fix this? You think you can just take what you want after everything?" I asked, my voice growing colder. "Yes, we'll get a lawyer, we'll fight this, and we'll take it to court." I let him talk, knowing full well they were out of their depth. "Good luck," I said, my tone flat. "You can't fight what's already been sealed." For a second, my father actually looked defeated. There was no bravado in his posture now. He had lost, and he knew it. "It's not over, Ava," my mother hissed. "You'll see." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. The facts were there. The will had already been executed. My grandfather had made sure of that. There was nothing they could do to undo it. Not anymore. The next day, I woke up to the usual silence of the house. But it wasn't just any silence. It was a peaceful kind of quiet. The kind of silence that settles after the storm, when everything has been said and done, and there's no need for anything else. The phone buzzed again. Another call from Mom. Another failed attempt at rewriting the past. I let it ring. The noise wasn't necessary anymore. Instead, I walked downstairs to Grandpa's study, where I had spent so many hours growing up. His leather chair still sat there empty, but still warm with the memory of the man who had shaped me. His desk untouched. The same piles of paper scattered across the surface, all of it reminding me of his meticulous, no-nonsense attitude. This was my domain now. This was my place. I made my way over to the old bookshelf, filled with his journals and letters. There was something calming about the way he had kept everything. A collection of his thoughts, his values, his wisdom. I ran my fingers over the spines, my mind wandering back to the years I spent with him. The way he had always been there for me when no one else was. The way he had shown up, even when no one expected him to. In that moment, I understood it all. He wasn't just a man in a uniform. He was a symbol of what it meant to stand firm, to show up when it mattered, to be the person others could rely on. It wasn't long before Gregory Thorne called again. His voice was steady, almost reassuring, like he had been waiting for this call for years. "It's done, Ava." His voice was calm, but I could hear the satisfaction in it. "Your parents filed the motion, but it was dismissed. The judge agreed. The will stands." I nodded, although he couldn't see me. I wasn't surprised. I know. The next few weeks passed in a blur. My parents tried every angle, every tactic they could think of, but it was like watching water fight against stone. It didn't matter how hard they pushed. They were never going to move me. The papers had been filed. The will had been executed. The house was mine. One day, I received a letter from the local paper. It was a feature on the Hall Foundation, the organization I had started in Grandpa's memory. The headline read, "Granddaughter turns betrayal into brotherhood. The Hall Foundation serves forgotten veterans." I smiled, reading through the article. It was everything Grandpa had stood for. His legacy was alive, not just in his estate, but in the lives of others. And then, at the bottom of the page, I saw a message from my mother. She had forwarded the link to me with a red question mark attached. She had no words, just a question mark. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. She had made her choice. And now, it was too late. That night, I sat on the porch, watching the sunset. The house was still. The world was still. And for the first time in a long time, I could feel the weight of peace settling in. Grandpa had always told me that honor was more than just a word. It was a way of life. And now, I understood that. It wasn't about what I inherited. It wasn't about the money or the property or the fame. It was about who showed up, who stayed, who fought for what was right. And, in the end, I was the one who stayed. I was the one who showed up.